The topic on loss and damage often sounds like a very unfamiliar concept and sounds very new actually in the context of the fight against climate change. But for Africa, for far too long, we have experienced a lot of impact resulting from loss and damage due to climate change. From Nigeria, where millions of lives were displaced due to floods for the past few years, to Zambia, where in the recent past rain season, hundreds and hundreds of households were displaced due to flash floods. Property were destroyed, and these were actually irreplaceable because some of the impacts affected our heritage sites. For countries like Malawi, thousands of livelihoods have been displaced due to the tropical cyclone Freddy, and the impact goes beyond that because it has impacted on various socio-economic aspects of the country. Malawi is in desperate need for support because they cannot be able to pay alone for the loss and damage resulting from the cyclone that has impacted them. It is assuring that last year at the COP27 in Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh, a historical decision was arrived at, and this was a decision to establish a funding framework for loss and damage. However, there's so much work that still needs to be done because for Africa, we have already accumulated all these losses for a long time. And for Africa, this issue is so urgent. And this issue is actually taking away our rights to livelihoods that are sustainable. Hectares of forest has been lost due to wildfires resulting from acute droughts. A lot of crops have been lost due to drought. And this is very serious for Africa because over 50% of African jobs are created from agriculture. But also we know that it impacts heavily also on the welfare of young people in Africa. About 60% of the African continent is young people, and these have their future at risk due to consequences of loss and damage resulting from climate change. And now this is a topic that we're putting on the table with the developed world, with the polluters, to take it as serious as it's supposed to be, because Africa is in dire need of help. Help in terms of building its technical capacity, institutional capacity, and also the need for financial resources to adequately address the consequences resulting from the climate crisis. We know that Africa by 2050 will be as big as China and India combined. And this means that the consequences are going to be even worsening for Africa. Africa is the most vulnerable continent when it comes to the impacts of climate change. But on top of that, the least or among the least that contributes to the greenhouse emission. So for us to fight for an equitable and just approach to fighting climate change, we need to take into consideration the affairs of Africa. How then is Africa going to attain its objectives towards the Agenda 2030 on sustainable development goals if we are not being helped? Loss and damage is very practical and real for Africa. We know already that in Africa, poverty levels are so high, the socio-economic inequalities are so evident. We also know that Africa is in huge debt. So Africa has to fight debt, Africa has to fight poverty, Africa has to fight the socio-economic inequalities, and on top of that, we have loss and damage as a result of climate change, which exacerbates our problems. This is why loss and damage is a very important subject for Africa. And this is why Africa is in desperate need for assistance from the technical perspective, from the financial perspective, and from the moral support perspective. And for developed world and polluters out there, this is our call as Africa. Extend your helping hand, show commitment, demonstrate climate leadership by enhancing your commitment and resulting from the Paris Agreement. Let's fight against climate change, reduce emissions, find support for Africa in terms of financial resources, build Africa in terms of technical capacity that is required to adapt to the climate change effects, and also help Africa in terms of technology transfer, help Africa in terms of providing resources that are required to build stronger systems and policies that will help us be able to move forward and address the much needed climate crisis that is facing Africa today. Thank you for listening, and I pray and hope that developed world polluters will take accountability for the mess that has been caused in the face of the climate crisis itself. Reduce your emissions, extend your support, provide access to finance, climate finance, and provide support in terms of technical capacity, technology transfer, and also handhold Africa towards a future that is more resilient, and they will be able to address some of the challenges by themselves as Africa. We must act now to ensure a sustainable future for Africa and the planet.